Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're embarking on, well, a truly profound and maybe challenging journey. We're diving into the very foundations of language, thought, and what it really means to be human.
And our guide for this particular intellectual adventure is one of the 20th century's most, let's say, enigmatic and influential philosophers, Ludwig Wittgenstein.
Right. We're not just skimming the surface here. We're going deep into his major work, Philosophical Investigations. This is a book that didn't just add to philosophy. It fundamentally reshaped its landscape. It questions how we understand, well, everything, from the words we speak to our most intimate inner experiences.
And our mission today is really to extract the most important insights from his complex arguments and hopefully reveal how Wittgenstein's ideas can genuinely transform the way you think about thinking itself.
Absolutely. It promises to be quite the ride.
And, this deep dive is maybe less about discovering brand new theories and more about rediscovering what's already right there, right in front of us.
Yeah, that's a key point.
Wittgenstein's genius, I think, lies in his ability to make us see the familiar in a completely new light. He challenges assumptions about language and reality that are so ingrained we barely even notice them, let alone question them.
Right, assumptions we just take for granted.
Exactly. And he offers not some grand philosophical system, but something more like therapy, a kind of therapy for philosophical confusion, helping us navigate what he actually called the bewitchment that language can cast upon our understanding.
Bewitchment. That's a strong word.
It is. So you should prepare for some genuine aha moments as we explore how these insights don't just solve old philosophical puzzles, but in a way dissolve them entirely. It really can change how you approach thought itself.
Okay, so to truly grasp how radical Wittgenstein's work is, we probably first need to understand the view of language he was arguing against, the one he meticulously dismantled. And it's a picture of language that feels incredibly intuitive. One that most of us probably carry around without even realizing it. A really classic representation of this traditional view comes from St. Augustine.
Indeed, yeah. Wittgenstein kicks off the philosophical investigations by deliberately quoting a passage from Augustine's Confessions. It's a foundational move, really, because it immediately sets up the target he wants to critique.
Okay, so what does Augustine say?
Well, Augustine describes how he learned language as a child, watching adults. And as Wittgenstein recounts it, Augustine basically posits that the words of language name objects.
Simple enough. Word equals object.
Pretty much. It's this beautifully simple, almost pristine model. A direct one-to-one link between a word and a thing. Augustine goes on saying that sentences are connections of such namings.
Okay.
So this suggests that the meaning of any given word is simply the object for which the word stands. Now, what's really striking, and Wittgenstein points this out, is how this model primarily thinks about nouns like table, chair, bread, and the names of persons.
Right, the obvious concrete things.
Exactly. And other types of words, verbs, conjunctions, adjectives, they get kind of relegated to a secondary, less important status. It's a compelling picture because it mirrors how we think we learn language, pointing to a cat, saying cat, pointing to a ball, saying ball.
And it feels so natural, right? It seems to explain so much so easily. Our first instincts about language learning, watching a child point and name things, they seem to just confirm this Augustinian view.
Absolutely. This Augustinian view gives us this sense of linguistic clarity. It suggests that every meaningful word must, at its core, stand for something, an object, maybe an idea, perhaps a sensation. It implies this direct, almost universal relationship. Word points to thing, that's the meaning.
So it's the bedrock of a lot of thinking about language.
It really is, both in philosophy and just in everyday life, often unexamined. However, Wittgenstein argues this picture isn't just limited, it's fundamentally misleading.
Okay, how so?
He uses this really potent metaphor. He describes Augustine's account of language learning like a child entering a foreign country. This child, in Augustine's view, can already think but just can't speak the specific language yet, or maybe is already able to talk to oneself.
Right. Thinking comes first. Language is just the labels.
Exactly. Now, that might seem pretty innocuous, but it carries huge philosophical weight. It implies that there's a pre-existing, non-linguistic thought, a private, internal language of the mind that's somehow complete before words even enter the picture.
Okay. So there's this inner world of pure thought, separate from language.
That's the implication. This idea of a purely private internal realm of thought, totally separate from and prior to public language, is a cornerstone of a lot of Western philosophy, think Descartes.
Yeah.
And Wittgenstein will ultimately question whether such a pre-linguistic, self-contained thought process can even truly exist.
Wow. So if thought is inherently tied to language and public practice, what does that mean for our sense of, well, individuality, or this idea of a private mind that philosophers have talked about for centuries?
That's the big question he opens up. If the child already thinks but just can't speak the local language, then language becomes just a superficial layer, doesn't it? A labeling system over an already complete and independent inner world.
Yeah, that's not just a point about linguistics. It challenges this deep-seated philosophical idea of a purely private mental realm. So for you listening, just take a moment. Think about how many words you use every single day that don't name a concrete, identifiable object. Can you really point to the meaning of words like but, or if, or hope, perhaps, therefore?
It suddenly gets much harder to apply that Augustinian model, doesn't it? The simplicity just kind of breaks down.
It really does. So if meaning isn't just about naming objects, and if this Augustinian picture is ultimately misleading, then what is the meaning of a word? Wittgenstein, ever the disruptor, offers a genuinely revolutionary answer. It fundamentally shifts our entire understanding of how language actually works in the real world.
This is really where Wittgenstein breaks new ground and offers a profound alternative. Instead of looking for some hidden essence or a static object that a word refers to, he completely redirects our attention.
Okay, redirects it where?
He urges us to ask not what is the meaning of the word five, but rather how is the word five used? This simple shift is the absolute core of his philosophy of language. The meaning of a word is its use in the language.
Meaning is use, not reference.
Exactly. It's a fundamental break from centuries, millennia really, of philosophical tradition that tried to pin down meaning through reference or definition or some kind of mental picture. For Wittgenstein, meaning isn't some static thing. It's an activity, it's a practice, it's a function performed within a context. It's about what we do with words, not just what they supposedly stand for.
That's fascinating. It feels less like finding an entry in a dictionary and more like understanding a skill, like knowing how to play an instrument or use a particular tool.
Precisely. And to really drive home the vast, often overlooked diversity of what words do, beyond just naming, Wittgenstein uses one of his most powerful analogies, the toolbox.
Ah, yes, the toolbox.
He says, think of the tools in a toolbox. There is a hammer, pliers, a saw, a screwdriver, a rule, a glue pot, glue, nails, and screws. Then he says, the functions of words are as diverse as the functions of these objects.
Right, so just like you wouldn't use a hammer to cut wood.
Exactly. Or a screwdriver to drive a nail. Words serve distinct, varied purposes within the bigger activity of communication. A simple noun like table might seem like a straightforward hammer, a naming tool. Okay? But what about if, or perhaps, or ouch?
Different tools entirely.
Totally different tools. They're more like the pliers for grasping, maybe the saw for separating, or the glue pot for joining things together. Each has a specialized active function within this intricate dance of language. They don't just name things, they do things.
That's such a profoundly insightful analogy. It immediately exposes how limited that simple naming view really is. We often get caught up in how words look or sound, their uniform appearance on a page or when spoken.
Right.
And we mistakenly assume they all do the same kind of work. It's like a trick our grammar plays on us, maybe.
You've hit on exactly what Wittgenstein warns against. He notes that this uniformity of their appearance can confuse us into thinking they have uniform functions, especially when we philosophize.
Especially then.
Yeah. We see words neatly lined up in a sentence, and our philosophical impulse, perhaps coming from that Augustinian picture, might lead us to seek a single underlying nature for all of them. But in reality, their jobs are as varied as those tools in a carpenter's box.
Okay.
And this crucial insight leads directly to his fundamental concept of language games. He says, the word language game is used here to emphasize the fact that the speaking of language is part of an activity or of a form of life.
Form of life. That sounds important.
It's absolutely central. It refers to the shared communal practices, the bedrock customs, institutions, even the biological givens that underpin human existence and make language possible in the first place. Our language isn't some isolated, abstract system. It's woven into our shared way of living.
Okay, so language is part of activity, part of a form of life. What are some examples of these language games?
He gives this incredible list showing the sheer diversity. Things like giving orders and acting on them, describing an object, constructing an object, reporting an event, speculating about the event, forming and testing a hypothesis, making up a story and reading one, acting in a play, singing rounds, guessing riddles, cracking a joke, telling one, solving a problem in applied arithmetic, translating, requesting, thanking, cursing, greeting, praying.
Wow, what an eye-opening list. These are all uses of language, right?
Yeah.
And none of them really fit that simple naming model perfectly. It pushes us way beyond the idea that language is primarily just descriptive.
Exactly.
Think about exclamations like water or away, ow, help, splendid, no. Wittgenstein asks, are you still inclined to call these words names of objects? And the answer for most of us would be a definite no.
Right. They don't name, they do something, they express a feeling, issue a command, signal agreement, convey rejection. They're active interventions in a specific context.
It highlights that language is fundamentally dynamic, not static.
It's not just a dictionary of labels, but this rich repertoire of actions we perform within a shared social context, within a specific form of life. The meaning of water isn't some silent image of water in my head. It's the urgent act of calling for water, maybe when thirsty or in an emergency, and the expected response from others within that shared understanding.
So the meaning is in the doing, the interaction, the shared human activity.
Pers-
This shift, then, from meaning as reference to meaning as use, anchored in our forms of life, is absolutely fundamental. It means understanding a word isn't about finding some hidden object it points to, but about mastering a skill within a social context, like learning how to use a specific tool in a team project or how to play a role in a play.
Yeah, it connects deeply to how we learn pretty much any skill through practice, imitation, joining in with a community.
Okay, if meaning is fundamentally about use within these language games, then how do we actually learn the use of words? What about that seemingly straightforward process of pointing to things and naming them? That seems to be how lots of kids start learning language. Surely that's about naming objects.
That's a crucial question, and a subtle one. Wittgenstein gives it a lot of attention. He calls this specific teaching method ostensive teaching of words.
Ostensive teaching.
Okay. So, for instance, a teacher points to a slab of stone and clearly says the word slab. But Wittgenstein immediately makes a vital distinction. He says, I do not want to call this ostensive explanation or definition because the child cannot as yet ask what the name is. I'll call it ostensive teaching of words.
Oh, so it's not a formal definition because the child doesn't have the framework for definitions yet.
Exactly. The child can't ask what is that called because they don't grasp the concept of naming yet. Now, he acknowledges this kind of teaching does establish an associative connection between word and thing. It's an important, maybe indispensable part of how we learn.
Sure, it seems necessary.
But he quickly adds a critical warning. In the language of Section 2, it is not the purpose of the words to evoke images. We might be tempted to think that when we point and say slab, a mental picture of a slab pops into the child's head, and that picture is the meaning.
Right, the mental image theory.
But for Wittgenstein, while an image might sometimes come along with understanding, it's not the purpose or the meaning of the word itself. The image, if it happens, is more like a symptom or maybe an aid, but it's not the core essence of the meaning.
So it's not a definition, and it's not primarily about conjuring mental images. That adds a real layer of nuance to what seems like such a simple act of teaching.
Absolutely. Ostensive teaching is an important part of the training in a language game, but it's nowhere near a complete explanation of meaning. Think about it. If you point to a red slab and say slab, how does the child know you mean the object itself and not its color, red, or its shape, or its material, or even the act of pointing?
Ah, yeah, there's an ambiguity there.
The child must already have some grasp of what kind of thing is being pointed out, some implicit understanding of the category of reference. Without that context, that shared understanding of the language game being played, pointing alone is just ambiguous. And Wittgenstein advises that when we deal with words like this or that in these ostensive explanations, it is best not to say that these words name anything. That helps avoid conceptual confusion. These words function differently. They direct attention. They contextualize. Rather than label an object in that simple Augustinian way, they're pointers within a system, not labels for a system.
This analysis sounds like it could have really profound implications, way beyond just learning simple names for simple objects. It seems to challenge a core philosophical assumption about, well, reality itself.
It absolutely does. This careful analysis of ostensive teaching leads him straight into critiquing a deeply ingrained philosophical project, the search for ultimate simples and composites.
Right, the idea of fundamental building blocks.
Exactly. For centuries, philosophers going way back to the ancient Greeks have looked for the fundamental, irreducible building blocks of reality. They believed complex things are ultimately composed of these simple elements. But Wittgenstein argues that the terms composite and simple are used in an enormous number of different and differently related ways.
So simple isn't just one thing.
No. What counts as simple isn't some inherent metaphysical property of an object, but depends entirely on the language game being played, on our purpose and context in that moment. He challenges us with these thought experiments. Is the color of a specific square on a chessboard simple, or is it composed of pure white and pure yellow? Is a 2-centimeter line simple, or is it 2 segments of 1 centimeter?
Oh.
The answer, he insists, changes depending on our context, the purpose of our inquiry, and how we're using the words simple and composite. There's no absolute simplicity floating out there.
So the whole idea of an ultimate objective simple might just be a trick of our grammar, or maybe a function of our purpose in speaking, rather than some profound discovery about underlying reality. That really pushes back against philosophies looking for irreducible truths.
Precisely. The philosophical urge to find ultimate simple elements that are somehow indestructible or cannot be destroyed is, for Wittgenstein, fundamentally flawed because it misunderstands the role these concepts play in our language games. These so-called elements aren't metaphysical things existing independently of our linguistic practices. Instead, they are part of the language. It is a paradigm in our game, something with which comparisons are made. They're conceptual tools we use for specific purposes.
Like a measuring stick is a paradigm.
Exactly. Or a color sample. To say, for instance, if it did not exist, it could have no name, simply means if this thing did not exist, we could not use it in our language game. It shifts the focus from a claim about what must exist in reality to a claim about how our language functions and what conceptual tools it gives us.
So we create the tools, and their simplicity or complexity comes from their role within our language games, not from some inherent quality of the universe itself.
That's the core idea. It unravels this deeply held notion that language maps neatly onto some pre-existing reality of simple building blocks. Instead, the concepts of simple and composite are themselves flexible tools within specific language games. It highlights the contingent, practical, context-dependent nature of our conceptual distinctions.
It's like saying a Lego brick is simple because it's a single piece in a child's toy set. But you could also call it composite if you're a chemist talking about plastic molecules. Or even say its color is composite if you're a physicist analyzing light wavelengths. It all depends on why you're talking about it that way, on the specific language game you're playing. The meaning, again, is in the use, not in some hidden inherent property.
Exactly. Use and context are king.
Okay, moving on from that idea of words as simple names for simple objects, which we've seen Wittgenstein pretty effectively dismantle, let's explore another cornerstone of his philosophy. This one directly challenges another deeply ingrained traditional way of thinking.
Right.
Historically, philosophers have often tried to define concepts by finding what is common to all instances of that concept, identifying a shared essential characteristic that serves as its definition. But Wittgenstein argues this whole search for a common essence often completely misses the point of how our concepts actually work.
He does, and this is another really liberating insight, I think. He states very directly that when we look at phenomena where we use the same word, it is not one thing common to all these phenomena, but they are related to one another in many different ways.
No single common thread.
Not necessarily. This is a radical break from essentialist philosophy, which assumes that for a word to have meaning, there must be a single property or set of properties that all things under that word share. Instead, Wittgenstein invites us to see a complex web, a network of overlapping and crisscrossing similarities, rather than one single unifying feature.
And he has such a brilliant, relatable way of explaining this. He uses a concept that's become incredibly famous in philosophy, family resemblances. It just immediately makes intuitive sense, doesn't it?
Yes, it's one of his most intuitive and really enduring insights. He uses this metaphor precisely because it captures the idea so perfectly. He says, I can characterize these similarities no better than by the word family resemblances, for this is how the various similarities overlapping and crisscrossing exist between the members of a family. build, facial features, eye color, gait, temperament, etc., etc.
Right, like in my own family, we don't all have the same nose.
Exactly. You might share a nose shape with your uncle, maybe eye color with your mother, a certain temperament with your cousin, but there's no single feature that every single member of the family possesses. Yet we recognize them all as belonging to the same family.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, similarly, games form a family. Think about it. What is common to all games? Some have rules, some don't really. Some have winners and losers. Some are more cooperative or just free form, like kids' spontaneous play.
Yeah, like just playing make-believe.
Right. Some involve skill, some are pure chance. There's no single universally defining feature, yet we all know perfectly well what a game is and how to use the word.
That's such a brilliant analogy. It's not like every game has to have rules and winners. Solitaire has no opponent. Children's spontaneous play might have few fixed rules, but we still instinctively call them games. This just cuts through centuries of philosophical attempts to find these rigid definitions for everyday concepts.
Exactly. And this observation has really significant implications for how we understand concepts and how we operate with language. It means that concepts like game, or even language itself, don't have rigid, sharp, essential boundaries.
But does that mean we don't really know what we mean by them, just because we can't give a perfect definition?
Not at all. And Wittgenstein powerfully counters this philosophical anxiety. He asks, when I give the description, the ground was entirely covered with plants, do you want to say I don't know what I'm talking about before I can give a definition of a plant?
Of course not. That would be absurd.
Right. We understand perfectly well what plants means in that context, even without a scientific, exhaustive botanical definition. Our ability to use the word effectively, to apply it correctly in various situations, is our understanding.
That's a powerful point. It really resonates with how we actually experience language day to day. We operate perfectly fine with concepts that are inherently a bit fuzzy or open-ended, not rigidly defined. Our communication isn't hindered by this flexibility. It seems like it's enabled by it.
Indeed. He pushes this further, noting that we can draw a boundary for a concept, maybe for a specific scientific purpose or a legal one or administrative. But he cautions this doesn't suddenly make the concept more usable in general, unless indeed for this particular purpose.
So defining it narrowly only helps for that narrow purpose.
Exactly. He uses another vivid analogy, trying to find a sharp picture for a blurred picture, like demanding a precise essential definition for an inherently flexible concept like good or ethical. He calls it a hopeless task because the original concept itself lacks strict, sharp borders.
Like trying to draw a perfect line between red and orange in a sunset.
Precisely. If the original image has colors flowing into one another without any clear boundary, you can't just draw a sharp line and say this is exactly where red ends and orange begins without making an arbitrary choice. A choice that doesn't really capture the essence of the original blurry image. You're imposing a rigidity that just isn't there.
This insight, I think, really helps us understand why so many philosophical debates get bogged down in definitions. It suggests our concepts are naturally flexible, context-dependent, sort of open-textured, not these rigid molds just waiting for us to discover their perfect, unchanging form. It helps dissolve those frustrating arguments where people insist on one single, precise definition for something everyone intuitively understands through its use.
So if concepts are like these family resemblances, this fluid network of similarities rather than having a single common essence, what does it truly mean to know what a game is? Is there some secret internal definition we have, a mental checklist we consult every time we see a new activity?
Yeah, what does knowing mean here?
Wittgenstein argues fiercely against that idea of a hidden, unspoken definition residing in our minds. He challenges us to look outwards at our actual practice. He asks, is not my knowledge, my concept of game, entirely expressed in the explanations I could give?
Explanations like?
Namely, he says, in describing examples of games of various kinds, showing how, by analogy with these, one can construct all sorts of other games, saying that I should hardly call this or that a game, and so on.
Ah, so knowledge is shown in the ability to use the concept.
Exactly. Your knowledge of what a game is isn't some hidden thing, an unspoken definition tucked away in your mind. It's your ability to use the word correctly, to explain it, give relevant examples, recognize new instances, understand how it relates to other concepts in different contexts.
That's operational knowledge.
Yeah.
Practical mastery.
Right. Not some static proposition. It's about how you participate in the language game of game.
So it's about what you can do with the concept, your competence in using the word, rather than some static internal mental state that perfectly captures its essence. This again pushes against that idea of a purely private mental realm defining meaning.
It does. And to further illustrate this flexibility and context dependence, even for seemingly definite things like names, Wittgenstein brings up Bertrand Russell's theory of names. This was a big deal in early 20th century philosophy.
Okay, Russell's theory.
So if someone says Moses did not exist, this statement could mean different things, right? It might mean the Israelites had no single leader, or their leader wasn't named Moses, or maybe no one person did all the things the Bible says Moses did.
Multiple possibilities.
Russell suggested that proper names like Moses are actually disguised descriptions. The name Moses stands in for various descriptions like the man who led the Israelites through the desert. And for Russell, the sense of a sentence about Moses changes depending on which specific description we implicitly accept.
So even names aren't simple labels, they're tied to descriptions and uses.
That's Russell's point, which Wittgenstein engages with. It shows how even names aren't just simple tags for fixed objects, but are linked to a cluster of descriptions and uses. And none of those is necessarily the definitive one.
But Wittgenstein adds a crucial, almost forgiving caveat to Russell's view, doesn't he? He says that we often use names without fixed meaning, and this lack of absolute precision does its use as little harm as it does to a table that it rests on 4 legs instead of 3, and therefore wobbles in certain circumstances.
That's such a brilliant and very human way to put it.
It is. He's saying this semantic wobble, this flexibility and lack of absolute precision, doesn't necessarily break language or make it unusable.
Exactly. And that really separates his pragmatic approach from the more rigid, formalist tendencies of some of his contemporaries, maybe even Russell himself sometimes. This shows that language, even with proper names like Moses, works remarkably effectively without needing absolute precision or a single fixed meaning in every single context.
Language is robust enough to handle it.
Yes. The richness of language allows for this flexibility. Our ability to navigate it, to figure out which meaning or set of descriptions is intended in a given situation, is just part of our linguistic competence, our mastery of the language game. We don't need to resolve all ambiguity for language to function powerfully.
We just cope with it like the wobbly table. It doesn't render the table useless.
Exactly. It's a practical understanding of how words work, acknowledging that language is a human tool, messy and flexible, not some perfect logical calculus.
This highlights that real-world language use often tolerates a degree of ambiguity that, well, philosophical theories might feel they need to eliminate in their pursuit of ideal clarity. It's practical, not purely theoretical. And this seems to have profound implications for what philosophy itself should be doing.
Absolutely.
So, if language is this complex, interwoven web of uses and resemblances, rather than a rigid system of naming, what then is philosophy's true purpose? Is it to build grand theories about this web, or maybe to refine it somehow?
This leads us straight to one of Wittgenstein's most radical and provocative redefinitions, the purpose of philosophy itself. He states very explicitly, "It was correct that our considerations must not be scientific ones. We may not advance any kind of theory. There must not be anything hypothetical in our considerations. All explanation must disappear, and description alone must take its place."
Wow. No theories, no explanations, just description.
That's what he says. It's a stark rejection of philosophy as a discipline that seeks to build grand systems or discover new facts about the world or propose new theories like science does. Instead, philosophy's task for Wittgenstein is about assembling what we have long been familiar with and gaining insight into the workings of our language.
So it's about bringing into clear view what's already there, but maybe obscured by our own linguistic habits or philosophical assumptions.
Precisely. It's an act of clarification, not discovery.
This is a really radical reevaluation. Philosophy isn't about creating something new or uncovering hidden truths, but about clarifying what's already right there, right in front of us, but maybe misunderstood. It sounds almost like a form of intellectual map-making, charting the familiar terrain of our concepts and language.
Exactly. And he continues this thought, saying, philosophy leaves everything as it is. It also leaves mathematics as it is, and no mathematical discovery can advance it. Its function is purely descriptive.
Believes everything as it is.
Its job is merely to describe the actual use of language, not to justify it or ground it or improve it. It's not about dictating how language should be, but meticulously observing and clarifying how it is actually used. The point isn't to refine or complete the rule system of our words in some ideal way.
So it's more critical, maybe therapeutic, clearing up confusions rather than solving problems like science does.
That's exactly the idea. The goal for Wittgenstein is perfect clarity, and this clarity results in philosophical problems that should completely disappear.
Disappear, not be solved.
Disappear. He sees these problems not as genuine intellectual puzzles about reality, but as deep disquietudes, rooted as deeply in us as the forms of our language and having this character of depth. They aren't problems of ignorance, just waiting for a new scientific discovery to solve them. They're more like self-imposed confusions.
Confusions arising
From misinterpretations of our own language. From our language going on holiday, as he famously put it, trying to use words outside their normal working contexts.
Oh, okay.
These problems, he says, are solved through an insight into the workings of our language, recognizing these workings despite an urge to misunderstand them. The insight, then, isn't a new truth about the world, but a clarity that dissolves the problem itself by showing it was just a linguistic entanglement, and not in our language.
The idea that philosophical problems disappear rather than get solved in the traditional sense is truly mind-bending. It suggests centuries of philosophical debate could be, in a way, a symptom of linguistic confusion rather than genuine inquiry into fundamental truths.
It truly is. He attributes these problems directly to the bewitchment of our understanding by the resources of our language.
That bewitchment again.
Yes. This bewitchment creates the illusion that the essence is hidden from us. We spend our time looking for something beneath the surface, for some profound, secret meaning or underlying reality, when actually the essence of meaning lies open to view and becomes surveyable through a process of ordering.
So we're looking in the wrong place.
We're looking through what's right there. It's like searching frantically for your glasses when they're already on your head. The solution isn't to look harder or further away, but to re-examine what's already in plain sight and see it for what it is. He famously remarked that what is most important for us is often hidden because of their simplicity and familiarity. One is unable to notice something because it is always before one's eyes.
Because it's just too close, too obvious.
Exactly. Now, this doesn't make philosophy trivial. Rather, it makes it a crucial therapeutic activity. Like a doctor who doesn't invent new body parts, but helps the existing ones function correctly by identifying and removing blockages or misunderstandings.
This perspective, then, invites you, the listener, to become a kind of linguistic detective. Observing how language actually works in practice, rather than getting tangled in abstract, often self-created philosophical puzzles that come from misusing our linguistic tools. It's about seeing the simplicity and familiarity of things that often escape us, precisely because one is unable to notice something because it is always before one's eyes. It asks us to slow down, pay a different kind of attention, and truly look at what we're doing when we speak, think, and interact with the world. Okay, building on Wittgenstein's radical rethinking of language and philosophy's purpose, let's now tackle another area where he really powerfully challenges our deepest intuitions. Our understanding of our own minds and mental processes. We commonly believe, I think, that when we understand something, it's an internal mental event, right? Like a light bulb going off in our heads, a private flash of insight. But Wittgenstein strongly pushes back against this introspection-based view, arguing it's often the source of philosophical confusion.
This is such a crucial area where he confronts our natural tendency to internalize and privatize cognitive states. He explicitly urges us, just for once, don't think of understanding as a mental process at all, for that is the way of talking which confuses you.
Don't think of it as a mental process at all. That's quite a command.
It is. He continues, instead ask yourself, in what sort of case, in what kind of circumstances do we say, now I know how to go on? He wants us to shift our focus away from imagining some fleeting, internal, private event and towards observing the public criteria for what we call understanding.
So what are the public signs that someone understands?
Well, he's not denying that we have experiences when we understand something. He's questioning whether those experiences define understanding.
Okay, so the aha moment, that private flash of insight, isn't the definition of understanding itself. It might be more like a symptom or a signal. which we then judge by what happens next, by observable actions in the world.
Precisely. Like hearing a triumphant chord in music, it signifies something, but it isn't the whole composition. It's part of a larger performance. While there might be distinctive experiences, what we might call mental processes, feelings, images that accompany understanding, Wittgenstein insists understanding is not a mental process.
It's not the feeling or image itself.
Right. That internal feeling or image doesn't constitute understanding. What constitutes understanding is the capacity to perform, to continue, to apply the knowledge. The criteria for someone saying, now I know how to go on, are the circumstances they say it in, and, crucially, their subsequent actions. Can they, in fact, go on correctly?
Right. If someone shouts, Eureka,
Yeah.
but then can't solve the problem.
Exactly. If someone exclaims, now I've got it, but then is completely unable to apply the rule or continue the series, we'd immediately question if they truly understood, wouldn't we? That aha is an exclamation, maybe an instinctive sound, something like a joyful start or a sigh of relief, not a description of a mental state that defines understanding. The proof, as they say, is in the pudding. It's in the observable behavior within a shared practice, within a language game.
And this rigorous way of thinking applies to something as seemingly straightforward and inner as reading, too, doesn't it? We might think reading is a very specific inner experience, a unique mental state we just know from the inside.
Yes, he applies the exact same critical lens to reading, challenging the idea of it as a single, uniform mental act. Reading, he argues, isn't just seeing printed words and making sounds that match an alphabet, nor is it one singular, particular experience.
So what is it then?
It's a family of cases, much like games form a family. He says, in different circumstances, we apply different criteria for a person's reading. It covers a whole range of activities. Sounding out letters slowly, recognizing whole words instantly, comprehending complex meaning, reading aloud with expression, reading silently to oneself.
Lots of different things we call reading.
Right. It's a learned skill that can become automatic, where words might seem to come of themselves or we hear them in our head. But this automatic feeling, this effortless flow, is still part of a public practice, not some solitary inner feeling that defines the act of reading.
So the subjective experience of the words coming of themselves describes an experience within the practice, but it's not the definition of reading itself.
Exactly. The rules for what counts as reading are public, not private.
This really challenges the common view of cognition based on introspection. It shifts the focus from what goes on inside our heads to the observable, shared, public criteria for knowledge and skills. It means that to truly understand what reading or understanding is, we need to look at what people do, how they participate in these activities, not just what they report feeling internally. That's a radical reorientation.
It really is.
Okay, building on this idea that understanding isn't some private mental process, let's explore how Wittgenstein applies this to rule following. This is another area where our intuition often leads us astray. We feel like there's an internal blueprint, maybe a hidden interpretation, or like an instruction manual inside our minds, guiding every step when we follow a rule, whether it's a math sequence, game instructions, or even just social etiquette.
That's a very common and powerful intuition, isn't it? Philosophers going way back to Plato have grappled with this, looking for some ultimate internal guarantee of correctness. But it's an intuition Wittgenstein meticulously takes apart.
How does he do that?
He uses the analogy of a signpost. A signpost clearly points in a direction, stands there like a signpost, as he puts it, but he notes it still leaves room for doubt about the exact path to take.
Like which road? The paved one, the dirt track, straight ahead.
Exactly. Should you follow the road, the footpath, cut cross-country? Should you go in the direction the finger points, or could it possibly mean the opposite for some weird reason? He says, and now this is no longer a philosophical proposition, but an empirical one. The signpost itself doesn't contain all possible interpretations or rule out all doubts.
So the meaning isn't inherent in the sign itself.
No. Its meaning in a given context is part of a shared practice, a convention, a form of life. It's not some unambiguous property built into the wood and paint.
So the signpost alone isn't enough. The context, our learned way of interacting with signposts, the shared conventions of our community, those are absolutely essential. Without that, it's just wood and paint.
Exactly. And this leads to his profound critique of the idea that an interpretation can ultimately ground a rule. He argues, every interpretation, together with what is interpreted, hangs in the air. It cannot serve as a support. The interpretations alone do not determine the meaning.
Hangs in the air.
Yeah.
Meaning it needs something else to hold it up.
Right. This is a crucial point, often discussed in philosophy as the rule-following paradox, which Saul Kripke famously explored in relation to Wittgenstein. The paradox suggests that if every application of a rule needed a prior interpretation to tell you how to apply it, and that interpretation itself needed a rule for how to interpret it, you'd fall into an infinite regress. You'd never actually act.
Interpretations all the way down.
Exactly. So at some point, we just have to act. Wittgenstein says, when following a rule, one does not choose. I follow the rule blindly.
Blindly, that sounds unthinking.
It doesn't mean mindlessly or without understanding. It means it's not a constant act of conscious, deliberate interpretation at every single step. It becomes a practiced, almost automatic way of acting, ingrained through training and participation in a shared form of life. It's the bedrock of our shared practice, our training, that allows us to simply act in line with a rule without needing constant internal justification or interpretation.
This sounds like a fundamental challenge to how we think about certainty and correctness when following rules, whether it's in math, logic, or even just everyday social norms. It seems to remove the idea of an ultimate internal judge or guide.
It really is. Think about his famous example of a pupil learning a mathematical series, like adding 2 each time. 2, 4, 6, 8.
Okay.
Suppose the pupil gets it right up to 1,000, but then they write 1,004, 1,008. And when the teacher questions them, the pupil earnestly says, "Yes, isn't it right? I thought that was how I had to do it. What's gone wrong here?"
They've misunderstood the rule somehow.
Right. But the problem isn't necessarily a faulty internal intuition or a wrong definition in their head. It's a breakdown in the shared practice, in the form of life, in the agreement about what counts as doing the same thing.
The agreement breaks down.
Yes. The teacher might have to give more examples, maybe correct them, but Wittgenstein notes it would almost be more correct to say, not that an intuition was needed at every point, but that a new decision was needed at every point. The right step isn't determined by some hidden mental entity in the pupil's head, but by the shared public way the order was meant and understood within the communal practice of the language game. By how we all continue the series.
The relationship between rule and same is interwoven, he says. That's a compelling thought. Our understanding of what counts as doing the same thing when we continue a series or follow instructions isn't an individual internal judgment, but something established through social interaction, training, a shared form of life.
Precisely. What counts as the right step to take isn't dictated by some internal private intuition, but by how the order was meant within the shared practice. Our common way of acting, our communal agreement, provides the system of reference by means of which we interpret a foreign language, or even our own.
So rule following isn't the solitary mental act. It's fundamentally social.
Yes. Our certainty in following a rule comes not from some mysterious inner light or an endless chain of interpretations, but from shared training, shared forms of life, and the communal agreement on what counts as correct. We learn to follow rules like we learn to ride a bike, through practice, correction, immersion in a collective activity. Our agreement in practice, not necessarily an opinion, is what makes language and rule following possible.
That emphasizes that rule following is a social practice, not a solitary mental act. Our certainty comes from shared training and community, not from some mysterious internal light. It makes you think differently about everything from basic arithmetic to complex legal codes. Their meaning and application are rooted in shared human practices, not just abstract logic.
Absolutely.
Now, let's delve even deeper into the mind, or what we think of as the mind. Let's apply this same rigorous critique to complex mental states. We often believe our intentions or desires, even commands, are fully formed in our minds before we act or speak, like they exist as complete private mental states that our words then just, express. But Wittgenstein applies the same critical lens here too, challenging their internal private nature.
This is another area where our ordinary language can really bewitch us, leading us to postulate these ghostly inner processes. Take a statement that sounds quite profound, and order orders its own execution.
Yeah, that sounds deep, like the order somehow contains the future action.
It sounds mystical, right? As if the order itself has this innate knowledge of its own future fulfillment, like it knows its execution before it is even there. But Wittgenstein clarifies this is simply a grammatical proposition.
A grammatical proposition, meaning
Meaning it's just about how we use the words. He says, if an order runs, do such and such, then doing such and such is called executing the order. It's not some mystical insight into the nature of orders. It's just a definition within our language game.
So it's a rule about how we talk about orders and actions.
Exactly. The meaning of the order is embedded in the action it specifies, in the public practice of following it, not in some pre-existing internal mental copy of that action. It's a common philosophical mistake, he thinks, to treat what's just a rule about word use as if it were a profound discovery about the nature of reality itself. Wittgenstein wants us to see that the apparent depth of such statements often comes from mistaking a feature of our language for a feature of the world.
So the meaning isn't some ethereal thing hiding inside the command itself, some kind of proto-action waiting to happen. It's in the established practice of what we call executing the order in shared human activity.
Exactly. Think about the connection between saying, let's play a game of chess, and all the complex rules of chess. That connection, he says, is affected in the list of rules of the game, in the teaching of it, in the everyday practice of playing.
In the practice, the teaching, the rule book.
Right. Meaning, for Wittgenstein, isn't a static, hidden mental state. It's an activity, it's a direction, a disposition for action. He says, when one means something, it is oneself that means, so one sets oneself in motion, one rushes ahead, and so cannot also observe one's rushing ahead.
Rushing ahead, like
Yeah.
you're already engaged in the action.
It's an act of engagement, of moving forward in a particular way within a linguistic practice, within a form of life. He even uses this powerful, simple comparison, yes, meaning something is like going towards someone. It's dynamic, an active orientation, not just a passive internal picture or a fleeting feeling.
It seems like we often get tempted to use these over-expressions, or what he calls philosophical superlatives, to describe these concepts. Like thinking is something unique, or it's an incorporeal process. We want to elevate these mental acts to something grounder, more mysterious than just everyday phenomena.
That's a very sharp observation, and it's a tendency Wittgenstein explicitly warns against as a major source of philosophical confusion. He argues that thinking is not an incorporeal process that lends life and sense to speaking, and which could be detached from speaking, as Schlemiel's shadow is taken from the ground by the evil one.
Ah, Schlemiel's shadow. So thinking isn't some ghost detachable from language and action?
That's the idea behind the colorful analogy. Thinking is deeply intertwined with our language and actions. It's not some ghost in the machine, some private ethereal activity separable from our public lives. What we consider essential about thinking or intending is contained in the rules governing how we use those words, not in some elusive inner phenomenon we have to somehow introspectively grasp.
So the essence is expressed in grammar.
Yes, we learn what it means to think to oneself or to intend something through observable behavior, shared contexts, and the language games surrounding those terms. There's no secret mental ingredient we need to look for. The how and when we use the words thinking and intending tell us what they mean. Our language provides the framework, the public criteria, through which we recognize and attribute these states both in ourselves and in others.
This really challenges the traditional introspectionist view of our own minds. Our intentions, thoughts, meanings, they aren't separate, invisible entities that our words just express. They're deeply embedded in our actions, contexts, and linguistic practices. They are, in a crucial sense, public phenomena, even when we experience them privately, because the criteria for understanding and talking about them are public.
That's a great way to put it. The criteria are public.
Okay, we've thoroughly explored how Wittgenstein reshapes our understanding of language, meaning, rule following, even the very nature of philosophy itself.
Okay.
Now, let's confront perhaps his most famous and certainly one of his most counterintuitive and often debated arguments. The critique of private language and the related discussion of how we perceive and experience the world.
The big one.
Yeah. The deeply ingrained idea that only I can know if I am really in pain feels like an unassailable truth, doesn't it? It seems to assert that our sensations are uniquely private, completely beyond any external verification or access.
This intuition of absolute privacy is precisely what Wittgenstein targets in his famous private language argument. He declares that assertion, only I can know if I am in pain, to be in one way false, in another nonsensical.
False and nonsensical. How?
Well, he argues that if we use the word know in its normal way, which implies the possibility of doubt or evidence or verification, then it's often false. Other people very often know when I am in pain. We see expressions, behavior, circumstances.
Okay, sure. Others can often tell. But what about the nonsensical part?
This is the truly provocative bit. He states, it can't be said of me at all, except perhaps as a joke, that I know I'm in pain. What is it supposed to mean except perhaps that I am in pain?
Huh. So saying, I know I'm in pain, doesn't add anything to just saying, I am in pain.
Exactly. The act of knowing usually implies you could be wrong, or you could check, or you have evidence. But for your own immediate pain, there's no logical space for doubt or for proving it to yourself. You simply have it. It's given. To say, I know I'm in pain, uses the word know in a way that breaks its usual grammatical rules and, in effect, empties it of its normal meaning in that context.
That's a really powerful distinction. So it's not that the pain isn't private in some sense, but that the concept of knowing it privately in that specific way is incoherent. I can imagine many listeners thinking, but I do feel my own pain, and no one else can truly experience my sensation. Isn't there a fundamental, irreducible privacy to some experiences, regardless of language?
That's a crucial and very common reaction, and it gets right to the heart of the argument. Wittgenstein isn't denying that you have a unique, subjective experience of your pain. What he's challenging is the idea that you could have a private concept of pain, a private meaning for the word pain, one that only you could understand, one for which there are absolutely no public criteria for its correct application.
A private concept.
Okay. The word sensation itself, just like pain, is part of our general, not me alone understandable language. Using it requires a justification that everyone understands. If you tried to invent a private sign, let's call it E, to refer to a specific recurring sensation, and you kept a purely private dictionary just in your imagination, well, how could you ever check if you were using E correctly the next time?
How would you know it's the same sensation you called E last time?
Exactly. There would be no criterion for correctness. As Wittgenstein puts it, right is whatever is going to seem right to me. And that means only that here, right cannot be spoken of. The whole concept of correctness, of making a mistake, requires public, shared criteria and practices. Without that, the difference between remembering correctly and merely thinking you remember correctly just collapses.
So the very idea of a purely private sensation known only to me, with no public way to check if I'm identifying it correctly, collapses because the standards of right or wrong application cease to exist for it. The concept itself couldn't be formed or used reliably.
Precisely. The critical point about private experience isn't just that each person has their own unique experience, but that nobody knows whether other people also have this or something else. It might be a possible, though unverifiable, assumption that maybe your experience of red is totally different from mine.
The inverted spectrum problem.
Right. But the word red functions publicly. Its meaning isn't tied to my private, inaccessible impression, but to our shared use of the word in our language games, to public agreement in judgments, that's red, no, that's orange, and practices, stopping at red lights.
So the meaning lives in the public use, regardless of the private feeling.
Yes. We learn the concept of pain not by being given some internal object called pain, but with language as part of our shared form of life, not before it. If someone doesn't understand the word pain, how do we explain it? Perhaps by means of gestures, or by pricking him with a pin and saying, see, that's pain. They show their understanding by his use of the word in appropriate context later on. And significantly, Wittgenstein notes that the word expression of pain replaces crying and does not describe it. Saying ouch or I'm in pain is a part of our learned pain behavior. It's a replacement for more primitive, non-linguistic expressions like crying or grimacing. It's not a description of an inner event or a report from a private realm. It performs a function in our shared human life, like eliciting help or sympathy.
This is a profound challenge to our common understanding of our inner world. It forces us to reconsider how even our most intimate experiences are shaped and made meaningful through public language and shared human practices. It pushes us to see our inner life not as some secret garden totally separate from others, but as fundamentally linked to the language and social forms of life we share.
It really does.
Okay, if our inner life isn't so purely private and individual, if even our sensations get their meaning from public language games, what about the subtle ways we perceive things, like seeing as? This is where Wittgenstein introduces a really fascinating phenomenon that touches on both perception and interpretation, challenging the idea that what we see is purely objective or given.
Yes, this is where the concept of noticing an aspect comes into play. It's a rich idea that highlights how our conceptual understanding and our learned practices can profoundly shape our very perception of the world. He gives an example. When looking at a face, all at once I notice its similarity with another. I see that it has not changed, and yet I see it differently. This sudden shift in perception is what he calls the noticing of an aspect.
So the physical data hasn't changed, the lines on the paper or the features of the face are the same, but our way of organizing it, structuring it, fundamentally shifts. It leads to a new visual experience.
Exactly. It feels like more than just a change in belief or interpretation. It feels like a genuine, almost involuntary shift in how we visually experience something, as if the object itself is presenting itself differently to us.
Like the famous duck-rabbit figure.
That's the classic example. You can see it now as a duck, now as a rabbit. The lines on the paper haven't changed at all, but your perception of it has been reorganized. Or think about perceiving a facial expression first as, say, timid, then with maybe a slight shift in focus or context, suddenly seeing it as courageous. These are what he calls organizational aspects, where parts of the picture belong together which before did not. It's like suddenly hearing a different melody or a new rhythm emerge from the same sequence of musical notes. The raw data stays the same, but its organization and meaning change for you.
What's particularly striking is that seeing an aspect and also imagining seem to be, in a very specific sense, subject to the will. You can be told, now see the figure like this.
Yeah.
See it as a duck, and you can often do it. But you can't be told, now see this leaf green, if it's actually red, or vice versa, just by willing it.
Right, not basic sensory perception.
This suggests a deliberate, active engagement, maybe a kind of mental effort or training involved in shifting your perception, which feels quite different from just basic sensory input hitting your eyes.
Absolutely. This deliberate volitional element distinguishes aspect seeing from basic sensory perception. You can choose to try and see the duck or the rabbit. You can choose to imagine a face as smiling, but you cannot choose for a physically green leaf to appear red to your eyes just by wanting it. This active engagement highlights the role our concepts, our will, our training play in shaping how we experience the world, how we read meaning into what we see.
And Wittgenstein even discusses something called aspect blindness, right?
Yes, a condition where a person apparently cannot experience these shifts. He compares it to someone lacking a musical ear. They might see all the individual lines and shapes of the duck rabbit, but they just can't see the duck as a rabbit, or vice versa. Or they might hear notes but not grasp the melody as a whole. They seem to lack the conceptual and practical framework needed to make that perceptual shift.
And here's where it gets really interesting, tying back to our whole discussion. Wittgenstein explicitly links this phenomenon of seeing aspects directly to language itself.
He does, and this connection is really one of the profound culminations of his insights in the later parts of the investigations. He states, the importance of this concept, seeing the aspect, lies in the connection of the concepts, seeing the aspect, and experiencing the meaning of a word.
Experiencing the meaning of a word, how does that connect?
Well, just as we can suddenly see a figure differently, we can also sometimes experience the meaning of a word in a flash. Think about how a word might suddenly lose its meaning for you if you repeat it over and over again, becoming just a strange sound.
Yeah, that happens.
Or conversely, how you might vividly experience the meaning of soft when you touch a particular fabric, or sharp when you feel a blade's edge. It's not just a purely cognitive process of definition lookup. It can be a felt, embodied engagement with the word within a context, a kind of perceptual aha moment that brings the word to life for you.
So it emphasizes that meaning isn't just a static definition, it's something we actively grasp and experience through our participation in language.
Exactly. It shows how our concepts don't just passively describe reality, but actively shape our perception of it. It highlights how meaning isn't just in the words themselves or in some isolated internal thought, but in how we engage with and experience those words in context, much like how we read different aspects into an image. It's another powerful argument against seeing meaning as residing in an isolated internal mental realm, and instead placing it within the public, contextual nature of our cognition and perception.
Fascinating. Okay, finally, let's tackle some of the most complex and maybe deeply personal of inner experiences. Mental states like belief, expectation, hope, and other emotions. Are these also not solely private, introspectively defined feelings that exist independently of our actions and contexts? Or does Wittgenstein's critique extend even here?
This is really where Wittgenstein brings his entire philosophical approach to bear on our psychological concepts, once again challenging that tendency to treat them as purely private, internal entities. He argues that our mental states are profoundly contextual, completely woven into the fabric of our lives.
Context is key again.
Absolutely. He says what now happens has meaning in the surroundings. The surroundings give it importance. He uses a really vivid and poignant example for hope. The word hope, he says, refers to a phenomenon of human life. A smiling mouth smiles only in a human face.
A smiling mouth smiles only in a human face. What does that mean?
A smile, seen in isolation, might just be a particular contraction of facial muscles. But in a human face, embedded in a human life, within a form of life, it becomes an expression of joy, kindness, maybe amusement, perhaps mischief. Its meaning comes entirely from its context within that life.
So the context is not just important for understanding these complex states, it's absolutely essential. Without it, the inner feeling itself becomes unintelligible or meaningless.
Precisely, he pushes this. If you were to somehow conceptually cut out 1 minute of hope from its surroundings, say, you're hoping desperately for a friend to arrive with money you urgently need, that isolated minute would lose its character as hoping. The whole institution of money itself is part of that context, as is your relationship with the friend, the past events leading to the need, the future possibilities. These states are deeply embedded in a situation and in our shared human practices.
Like cutting one frame out of a movie, it loses its meaning without the before and after.
Exactly. Or take a minute from a king's coronation, the crown being placed on his head. If you cut that minute out and put it in a context where gold was worthless, crowns were just party hats, and the robes were cheap costumes, the entire meaning of that moment changes, right? The same applies to our emotional and psychological experiences. They get their significance from the rich tapestry of our shared form of life.
What about certainty or belief? We often feel these are very strong, purely internal convictions, like a deep inner feeling of assurance. How does Wittgenstein approach those?
For certainty and belief, he makes a similar and equally powerful point. The expression of certainty or conviction is not merely some feeling that accompanies our speaking or thinking. Instead, he says we should ask, how is the certainty that this is so manifested in people's action?
How is it shown in what we do?
Right. Our certainty that, say, a boiler, built according to calculations, won't explode is shown by our willingness to stand near it, to light the fire under it. Our certainty that fire burns is shown by our refusal to put our hand in it. It's revealed in our behavior, our dispositions, our way of interacting with the world.
Okay.
Similarly, he notes, believing is a state of mind. It persists. And that independently of the process of expressing it in a sentence, this is revealed to me in the case of someone else by his behavior and by his words. When I say, I believe X, it reveals a disposition, a way of acting in the world relevant to X, a commitment to certain actions or inferences, not just a fleeting internal feeling that has no outward manifestation or consequence. The concept of belief is tied to the evidence of a persistent disposition over time.
So these aren't just amorphous inner feelings floating free. They are dispositions, ways of acting and being in the world, and their meaning is tied to their context and the behavior they entail. It's about what we do and say in specific situations, rather than some hidden mental substance that only we can access. This is a really profound move away from any kind of mind-body dualism.
Absolutely. Wittgenstein helps us realize that our psychological concepts like hope, belief, understanding, even pain, are not strange, isolated mental processes or purely private entities. They are rather phenomena of our shared form of life. They're understandable through our language games, our observed behaviors, and the rich context in which they occur.
So they're not mysterious, incorporeal things.
No. Instead, they are integral parts of the complex public tapestry of human interaction and activity. When we attribute these states to ourselves or others, we're engaging in a language game that has its own rules, its criteria, its justification found within our shared human practices. This entire approach is a radical redefinition of the mental, grounding it firmly in the public realm of action and language.
This redefines how you understand your own inner world and the experiences of others. It suggests that psychological concepts gain their depth and meaning not from some inaccessible internal realm, but from the rich tapestry of human life, shared practices, and public language. It's a powerful call to observe the familiar, to scrutinize the obvious, rather than constantly seeking the hidden.
A call to look, not just think.
Yeah.
Hashtag outro.
Wow. What an extraordinary journey.
Yeah.
A real reevaluation of our most basic assumptions about language, thought, and even our own minds. Wittgenstein invites us to look not for hidden depths or metaphysical essences lurking beneath the surface, but for the intricate, often overlooked patterns and practices of our everyday language and actions.
We've really traversed a vast philosophical landscape today, haven't we? From challenging Augustine's simple naming model to embracing Wittgenstein's complex web of language games and family resemblances, and finally to sort of dissolving the illusions of a purely private mental life. We've seen how he tackles philosophical confusions by focusing intensely on how words are actually used in their natural habitat, rather than what we imagine they must refer to, or how we think we introspect them.
Yeah, this deep dive really reveals that many profound philosophical problems might not be grand mysteries of the universe waiting for some new discovery, but rather symptoms of our language going on holiday, as he so famously put it.
Right, language operating outside its normal everyday context and creating puzzles where maybe none genuinely exists in the first place.
It's quite a thought.
Ultimately, Wittgenstein offers us a really powerful tool, I think, for clarity and maybe even liberation. By struggling against this bewitchment of our understanding by the resources of our language, we can potentially gain a deeper, more accurate picture of ourselves and the world. It's about cultivating a new kind of attention to the familiar, learning to see what's always been there, but was perhaps invisible precisely because of its very obviousness.
So, for your own reflection, maybe consider this. In our daily lives, how often do we fail to notice the fundamental simplicity and familiarity of things? The actual use of our words, the practices underlying our actions, precisely because they are always before our eyes.
Hmm.
And if meaning is truly found in use within a shared form of life, what would we genuinely lack if we did not experience the meaning of a word? If words were just empty sounds, completely detached from that public contextual engagement we've been talking about?
That is a truly profound question indeed, one that really underscores the rich, shared fabric of our linguistic existence. Keep observing, keep questioning, and keep deep diving into the fascinating world of language and human life all around you.
We certainly hope this deep dive has given you a fresh and perhaps profoundly illuminating perspective on these fundamental issues. Until next time, keep exploring.